And on PM Express tonight, a conversation that has started as the Audit Service Board issues a directive indicating the Auditor General Domelovo cannot return to work tomorrow because he is due for retirement. Recall, he was handed a 167 days forced leave. That leave ends tomorrow. But whether or not he can safely return to work is in a dilemma. Also, 3 nominees rejected by Minority Caucus of the Appointments Committee. 5 others deferred to reappear before the committee. The report has since been submitted to plenary. It will be debated upon from tomorrow. But let's look at the Auditor General. Is he returning to work tomorrow or not? We do not know. His return to office really has become a matter of contention as a letter written today by the Audit Service Board challenges the nationality of Mr. Domelovo, whilst adding Mr. Domelovo should have retired by 1st June last year. So just a quick background to this whole conversation. Daniel Domelovo was appointed by the former President John Dramani Mahama. He charged then Senior Minister Yao Osafo after $1 million was paid to Kroll and Associates, and that issue was very controversial. President Akufo-Addo directed Auditor General Daniel Domelovo to proceed on leave. His accumulated annual leave of 123 working days. The presidency said it relied on Section 20 and 32 of the labor law, and also based on precedent set by former President Atta Mills when he asked the then Auditor General Edward Agyemangua to also proceed on leave. Remember, we've been trying to speak with Mr. Agyemangua, who promised to speak to us on radio. We since haven't been able to reach him. Dr. Domelovo wrote back to the presidency urging President Akufo-Addo to consider the directive as it was unconstitutional and flouted the labor law. I mean, just as he could finish with that statement, Daniel Domelovo was also handed another letter because he said he had observed that his work was embarrassing the government. Then, following that, the presidency extended his leave by an additional 44 days, making it 167. CDD fellow, US-based Ghanaian lawyer, Professor Kweku Asare sued the Attorney General and 2 others over this directive. Asked the court to rule that the directive by the president flies in the face of law and is inconsistent with the letter and spirit of Article 1877 of the 1992 Constitution. Now, let's talk about the Minority Caucus of the Appointments Committee rejecting 3 ministerial nominees and deferring 5 to reappear. Hawa Kumsin is one of the 3. Minister designates for Fisheries and Aquaculture Development. The reason, the group says, could not provide convincing grounds for the shooting incident during the voter registration exercise in Kaswa on July 20, even though it acknowledges her belated apology for her recklessly dangerous conduct. Dr. Usefri Akoto, Minister Designate for Food and Agriculture, is also one of the people that the Minority Caucus say they've rejected. And their reason, one of the reasons, it says he was untruthful under oath to the committee on the circumstances leading to the abrogation of the Fruit and Export Terminal contract of 2015 by Gapua on his express instructions as contained in a letter dated 11th January. Kojo Opon Kroma, Minister Designate for Information, is one other. He's one of the 3. And the group says he was not candid with the committee on the multiple infractions of the law leading to the Bank of Ghana's revocation of the license of Oval Microfinance, a company in which he was 83% majority shareholder. The 5 others who have been deferred, according to the Minority Caucus, Kweku Agyeman-Menu, Minister Designate for Health, Eslo Uso-Ekufo, Minister Designate for Communication, John Peter Amewu, Minister Designate for Railways, Kwesi Amoakwata, Minister Designate for Roads and Highways, and Godfrey Yeboah-Dame, Minister Designate for Attorney General and Justice. So this is the conversation we'll be having. I have all the people who will be reacting to what has been happening today and what will happen in Parliament today. Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante is Director of Advocacy and Policy Engagement, CDD Ghana. Edem Senanu He's co-chair, Citizens Movement Against Corruption and Management and Development Consultant. Franklin Kujo is president of Imani Center for Policy and Education, and Professor Kwabena Safo-Kantanka is senior research fellow at Auditor. I'm grateful, gentlemen, for your time. I'll just take my seat and we'll continue with this conversation. Let's start from the Auditor General, Daniel Domelovo, who has been handed a letter from the Audit Service Board, which gives indication that the Auditor General may never have the opportunity to resume work from his forced leave. And I'll read excerpts of that letter. And so the letter says that observation, that's the letter that was issued today. In fact, there's been a number of exchanges between the board and Mr. Domelovo. This is the last letter that was issued to him today. And I'll read essay. Says, that observation of your responses and explanations contained in your above reference letter make your date of birth and Ghanaian nationality even more doubtful, and clearly establishes that you have made false statements contrary to law. As we stated in our letter, referenced 26 February, these disparities and anomalies in your responses go to the heart of administration of audit service, whose duty it is to establish the veracity of formal employment-related statements and claims of its employees. And number 14 of that letter says, records made available to the board indicate that your date of retirement was 1st June 2020, and as far as the audit service is concerned, you are deemed to have retired. By a copy of this letter, the board is informing the president, who is your appointing authority, to take necessary action. Additionally, the board is making available to the president all the relevant documents at our disposal. Signed, Professor Edward Ajiman, Chairman, Audit Service Board. Dr. Asante, what's your own interpretation of this letter?
Oh, good evening, and good evening to your viewers. Yeah, I haven't had an opportunity to go through all of that. It's already curious that it is coming at the time when the Auditor General's forced leave ends today, and he's supposed to resume tomorrow. And for me, it's just another clear indication that, you know, the Audit Service Board, led by its chairman, wants to continue this very shameful behavior. It seems like the only you know job the audit service is doing is to stop the Auditor General from working, and I don't you know they seem to have a lot of time to do this. So it's very disappointing. I mean, we know that the Auditor General will retire in June anyway, so maybe another 3 months. So this whole matter coming at this time, obviously, for me, it's just ridiculous, and it just adds to the fuss around this whole issue. But after we've already said, this is not a matter just about the Auditor General. It's a much bigger issue. It's a constitutional issue. It's a big governance issue. So we'll wade through all of these matters that come. It has to be done in accordance with the rule of law, and I'm sure when we've all gotten an opportunity to review what has transpired, we'll be able to respond appropriately. But it doesn't, you know, as I said, Domelovo's situation is just part of the story. There's a bigger challenge as to the president's powers to ask, you know, independent heads to go on leave. Those are the matters that I think are even more important, even if Mr. Domelovo leaves.
But Dr. Asante, they raise anomalies and discrepancies in, I mean, which they say are issues that are core to the administration of the audit service. Isn't this genuine?
Oh, well, I mean, as I said, I mean, I'm not, you know, this is an administrative process that they have initiated. And I'm sure there are responses from Mr. Domelovo. They have made a decision that they don't believe his explanations. They are going to send the documentation to the appointed authority to make a decision. So let it play out. You know, I'm not going to doubt one way or the other. But one thing I can say is that if he turned out to be a Togolese, then actually I even have more respect for him, because he's done more for Ghana than a lot of Ghanaians who say they love Ghana.
Dr. Edem Senanu, you want the Auditor General, Daniel Domelovo, and in fact, you describe this whole thing as an agenda, a hidden agenda, and you say it's a ploy. What kind of agenda could this be? And what's the interest? But also fundamentally, what's your basis for this allegation?
Well, thank you. I mean, clearly there's a personal vendetta going on here. I mean, the Audit Service Chairman appears to have all the time to come up with these things, which really sometimes beat your imagination. The last time they had locked up his office for security reasons, and the most secure person they gave the key to was the secretary of the office, who was so afraid of keeping the key, gave it to a director, who was so afraid, gave it to somebody else. This time, we are talking about the fact that Mr. Domelovo's passport itself was gotten with the wrong information. I mean, we know that our passport process involves the rigorous process of cross-checking the source documents. Now, the man says my grandfather was Ghanaian, my father Ghanaian, my mother Ghanaian. He's able to demonstrate that his name Yao can only be a Yao if it is 1st June 1961. If you went to 1st June 1960, it was not. Obviously, this is a mistake. And now we want to make a whole fuss and say we are sending it to the president. Mr. Domelovo should just report to work tomorrow. There's clearly an intent by this chairperson to ensure that Mr. Domelovo does not occupy that seat. In any case, the man's legacy is going to stand the test of time.
What will be his interest to do that?
Don't forget that he was a former Auditor General himself. And one of the things that we had asked ourselves as civil society is how come this law on surcharging had been sitting there all this time and nobody had attempted to use it, you know? And I think that's one of the things that Mr. Domelovo has done very well to his credit that former Auditor Generals did not do. And so if you're going to make a toe-to-toe comparison at this stage, Mr. Daniel Domelovo stands tall. And perhaps that may be, I mean, obviously it's a speculation, but one just can't understand the extent to which this chairman of the board has gone to seemingly want to ensure that Auditor General Daniel Domelovo, who is still, as it were, the Auditor General of Ghana, goes back to work tomorrow. And we are looking forward to seeing him in his office tomorrow. You
actually want him to go confidently to work tomorrow. The last time he tried, his office was under lock and key.
Look, a lot of this
you
is so
believe
comical.
it will work out this time?
I'm sure our children coming to read this story, part of the history of Ghana, governance history, will be wondering what was happening. I think it makes a lot of reportage for media, so you must be happy. Please send your cameras there tomorrow early enough for us to find out what happens.
I think we can predict what will happen tomorrow. But let me bring in Franklin Kujo here. Does this letter to Daniel Domelovo forcing him to retire come to you as a surprise?
Well, good evening to my good friends and those watching from home. I'm not entirely surprised. I think it's one of these rather comical scenes that we have been said. And I'm thinking that the madness has to stop at some point. I mean, it's better to just say that you don't want the man there at all than to be Machiavellian in every rule of looking for every rule in the book to check him out. So I'm not surprised. I heard the board chairman explain himself. In fact, he even dropped the phone on your sister network. I think Omar Sanda interviewed him on City. And he was not convincing at all. So, except to say that what is playing out clearly is more than a witch hunt, really. And so for me, I'm not entirely surprised at all. I find it quite comical as well. And I think if there's anything the presidency should have learned from the last election, is that people detest this whole idea of trying to hound anti-corruption, publicly sanctioned anti-corruption agents. And so the story isn't pretty at all. And I thought the president can put his foot on the ground and say this craziness must end.
Dr. Bunasante, kindly update me on that court case. I remember that you went to court on the directive for him to go on leave.
Yes.
What has happened to the case?
The case has not been called yet, so we wait patiently for the Supreme Court to call the case. But as I said, that case goes beyond Mr. Domelovo anyway, but it's very important that we get the Supreme Court to speak on this matter, because the implications for what has happened is really, really severe for the sanctity of our democratic system, and therefore for me it's critical that the Supreme Court, hopefully after the petition is done, the Supreme Court moves speedily to address this problem, because we don't really want the situation that we are already experiencing with Mr. Domelovo to pop up somewhere else.
So, but Adam, recently we've had reassurances from the president through his ministerial nominees about his undiluted commitment to fight corruption. Some say events such as this one does not paint a picture of commitment to fight corruption on the part of government, correct?
Absolutely. And so we have another opportunity for the president to demonstrate that he really intends to give a robust support to the fight against graft. I was extremely disappointed when we appealed to him that, look, this does not follow the spirit and letter of our Constitution, looking at his own track record. And some of us were in the trenches when, as a younger man, he led us on campus against VAT and other things. And so we believe we have a certain understanding of what this president stands for. So I was really disappointed at the turn of events. And I'm hoping that we'll see some change, some statement that demonstrates that this is not. I really don't think that this chairman of the Audit Service Board is adding any political value to the government of the day by the actions that are being taken, and this constant hounding of a gentleman that many of us believe has done so much for this country.
We'll wait to see what happens tomorrow, because the last time it happened, we knew what was going to happen. Maybe something different will happen tomorrow, especially because the letter indicates that the audit board doesn't have the authority to actually ask Mr. Domelovo not to go to work. It's actually the president that has that authority. Once we've not heard that from the president, we'll look forward to what happens tomorrow at the office when Mr. Daniel Domelovo will report. He himself has indicated he will be there live and colored. So we'll be monitoring and, give you all the updates on what happens tomorrow as he resumes work. But one other issue we'll be talking about today is a rejection by the Minority Caucus of the Appointments Committee. They've given a number of reasons why they're rejecting these three people. The Information Minister Designate Kojo Oponkroma is one of them. Awa Kumsen is one of them, Minister Designate for Transport, and Dr. Efria Koto, who is Minister Designate for Agriculture, is also one of the three who the Minority Caucus say they will not approve. Let me start with you, Mr. Franklin Cudjoe, and for the Minister for Agriculture, for instance, he was rejected with a reason, and this is the reason. They say that he could not provide. Well, let me start with Hawa Kumsen, because they say she could not provide convincing grounds for the shooting incident during the voter registration exercise and did not appear to know much about the ministry she was being appointed to. Enough grounds to reject?
I thought that the president would have withdrawn her nomination immediately after that rather malperformance. And so I think the jury is out there reading about her conduct. I mean, let's say that she even apologized for the shooting incident, and sorry, all those comments about it were still under investigations were just unfortunately bothered us. Really, I mean, I couldn't believe it. But anyway, her performance as a minister, even if it was supposed to be ceremonial, was completely, I don't know what adjective to use, but I didn't think she served her purpose well. In fact, she actually disgraced the president, because the point is that if you're going to a ministry and you know you have a baggage and you've managed to shed off some of that baggage by apologizing, then the stellar at least pretend that you know something about your ministry. I was surprised. I don't think I should spend any more time, but to say that the president should have withdrawn her nomination almost immediately when she was on after the vet raid. For the great minister, my suspicions are that she, of course, I think he was a bit too bullish in the way he answered some of the questions. You see, some of these elected leaders tend to forget that ours is a very rare opportunity that we have, where we only get to get accountability if we are returning to the same ministry as we've seen. Otherwise, most of the ministers who are not coming back would forever go to their graves with some of the odious behavior. So for us, we were looking out for some respect that we should accord those representatives of us who are asking questions. I think that great minister brought it upon himself. He could have explained himself away immediately by saying, look, I did what I had to do. If there are infractions concerning certain procurement decisions that I made, I'm ready to look into them and then maybe make amends. But it appeared as if he was treating the committee members as children. We can understand the difference in age, but that type of politics is old school. And so he brought it upon himself. He's a fine gentleman, but I think he was too heckling, and it wasn't the best of encounters. Kojo Ponkrumah, by the way, I am shocked, really, except, of course, he was a bit evasive on the ownership issues of his media, and I suspect some issues around the Frontiers contract as well. The one thing that stood out for me was his suggestions that he didn't know certain things. That didn't come across that well. But I think he served his due. I suspect he was one of the very few people who did the yeoman's job. Look, I've got to say that much as I think the minority group should be looking out for us because we never get these kinds of opportunities, I think we should also be a bit cautious in the way we probably want to exert vengeance. Otherwise, somehow, the governance may come to a standstill, and then there will be problems. But fair enough, there must be questions that ought to be asked, and those that ought to be rejected must be rejected outright. I think we are on just this track, so I'm sure when we come to the others who have been withheld, would serve our due.
Dr. Pumpune Asante, what would you describe this? Play of party cards, equalization, or objectivity?
Well, let me lay some foundations first. So the appointment committee is made up of 26 members, 13 each from the MPP and the NDC side, including the chair, the first deputy speaker. Now, what we have gotten or has come through the media is basically the minority opinion, not the appointment committee's report. We obviously would get the appointment committee report, but if the intention of the minority is clear, then basically we are going to have a dead decision, basically, where between the majority and the minority where there is no agreement. And because you don't have a casting vote of any kind, what will be presented to the plenary will be a decision one way or the other where there's no agreement as to whether to reject or defer. Now, at the plenary, we know currently if everybody is voting, then you are likely to have 138 to 137, right? So what this presents is interesting, but the numbers might still change the decision or the intention of the minority. So that's one thing. The second issue is the legal requirement for the appointment of a minister. So if you go to Article 78, you have to be eligible to be elected as an MP to be a minister.
Yep.
And if you go to Article 94, to be elected as an MP, the basic things are you have to be a citizen, you paid your taxes, you are not in bankruptcy, you don't have any commission of inquiry, adverse findings, and so on and so forth. The issues that have been raised so far are along three issues: ethical issues, issues to do with competence, and issues to do with a suggestion that the person is lying under oath or is being truthful or not candid enough before the committee. And these matters, it can be argued, are basically additional to the legal requirement. So in terms of the history of the appointment committee, even though the Constitution is very bare in terms of who qualifies to be a minister, we have seen that these other matters do come into play. And at the end, it's a question about the numbers and how the other side feel. So I think that for me, I have to still commend the minority for raising these matters of ethics, because I think that anybody who wants to serve as a minister, at the minimum, should have a certain ethical conduct and orientation and have to be competent, and certainly have to be truthful and transparent in their activities. So I welcome that, but I also understand the technicalities involved, and therefore that might not still disqualify the person. I would just say that, Kojo Opong is a very good friend of mine. Some of those matters that have been raised, I think they are important, to his own credibility. And I think that maybe he took it too casually, but it's important that these disclosures are always made. And I'm sure he probably completed his asset declaration by now if he hasn't. But if he hasn't, those things should be clearly disclosed so that it's on record, so that there are no conflict of interest issues, and how you're going to manage those conflict of interest issues have to be also disclosed, so it doesn't create problems for him. So that's what I think is going to play out, that we are far from conclusion on whether these people have been rejected or even the ones that have been deferred, whether indeed they are going to be deferred. We'll find out really at the plenary.
Mr. Senano, you before even the appointment, you had reached out or actually asked the president to be firm, and you expected a radical change from the way the president executes his mandate, and which you said that would start from the people he appoints to work with. What does this kind of rejection mean to this radical change you've been advocating?
Well, I like to note that when I talked about a radical change, it was like, let's have people with a known track record, even within the limitations of the constitutional requirement to appoint a certain proportion from Parliament. I was saying that, look, let's be innovative enough to find others outside also who can complement this number. Some of the nominees, even before the vetting, we had already started asking questions. I'm not too surprised at the first three, and I think that Franklin has spoken to some of that already. I think that on one hand, the president's hands may have been tied, but on the other hand, it sends a good message that, look, we need to be a lot more thorough, a lot more focused on who is the most competent person, and sometimes really go beyond the parliament itself to look at what are the options we have. It also for us provides us an opportunity to rethink this whole thing of executive selection of ministers and what have you from parliament and the numbers that are selected from there. In general, we definitely need to have a constitutional review that rethinks some of these things. But at the end of the day, as Kojo pointed out, we should not necessarily think that this is purely just on the basis of the objectivity. I'm surprised at some of the referrals in the 5. Yes, there are issues, they are ethical, they should be raised. I'm wondering whether this was the only way to go about it. So beyond the fact that some of these candidates, really, we may not have expected them on the final list. I think that it also provides us an opportunity to know that, look, going forward, people must be a lot more serious about who they select, who they put on the list. And when you are preparing to go for these vetting sessions, be sure that you're on top of the facts so that you don't go and, as it were, conflict yourself through the process.
Okay, so we've all agreed that, I mean, looking at how the numbers from both sides is going to be interesting to see how plenary handles this matter, and that will happen from tomorrow. I don't know if Professor Sapong is back. Okay, he's not back. We'll try and reach, because Auditor has been doing a lot of research on Parliament. We'll try and find out what this will mean going forward in Parliament. And Dr. Pumpuni Asante tried to explain what will happen if there's a gridlock. Let's take a break on PM Express. When we return, we'll be delving more into some details, why some people have been rejected and the reason why some people have to reappear before the Appointments Committee. Welcome back to PM Express. We've been talking about Daniel Domelovo, who is supposed to resume work tomorrow, but has been issued a letter from the Audit Service Board that his retirement was due 1st June 2020, and so he has no business coming back to the office. But then they are not the appointing authority. So Mr. Domelovo says he will go back to work. He's waiting for the president who appointed or who has the appointing authority to take the action. So he would only obey the action or directive that's coming from the president. We've also been talking about 3 nominees of Akufo-Addo who have been rejected by the Minority Caucus in Parliament, and also 5 who are supposed to reappear before the Appointments Committee. And a number of reasons have been given why this is happening. Mr. Franklin Kujo, the last time we spoke, you indicated that Esle Owusu Kufo, for instance, was not forthcoming with information, especially with the Kelny GVG deal. Now, this is the reason why the Minority Caucus say they want her to come back to reappear, and they say the Minister Designate for Communications is required to provide further clarification, 1, on the criteria used for the closure of radio stations across the country. 2, the nominee is expected to respond to empirical concerns on the apparent discrimination against certain category of radio stations during the audits and closures of the stations. And 3, we demand concrete evidence from the nominee on her claims that the Kelny GVG contract has resulted in monthly savings of $1.1 million. Were you actually expecting this from the committee?
Well, I have no doubt at all. I mean, beginning this vetting, I didn't even understand why she was put forward, because I knew these matters were going to come up, and unfortunately her temperament gave way to actually providing answers to the cogent policy considerations that went into some of the decisions. Maybe you can forgive her for some of the rather, brave political decisions concerning the radio stations and what have you. I took that as politics, really. Even the borders on, I know my friends will not forgive me on the show, even the borders on freedom of speech. But look, all across board, and I listened to many radio stations and TV programs, there was virtually none that supported her candidacy as per the conduct during the vetting. Evaded almost all the policy questions. So at the of course, I don't have to gloat or bleat like that of a goat concerning the Carnegie VG. But, if she had only paid a little attention, rather than give all these futuristic phantom figures, maybe she would have had a better preparation towards the vetting. But look at her attitude. Her attitude itself was one that was their standoffish. And unfortunately, like I said, we only it's just a rare moment you can exert accountability. We agreed when they said they were going to work on the privacy issues, right? But we disagreed on the public financial management aspect and the procurement issues surrounding LGBT. But they come back to bite her because there was actually nothing to start with. The whole process was shambolic. So I'm not surprised you couldn't provide those answers. I'm not responsible for those decisions, by the way, please. I could only say that because of her cutback, she had zero knowledge in policy. And that was sad, because as somebody who is very smart, as I know her, instead of preparing and then going to face the committee and provide cogent answers, she chose a high road to, obstructionism and then invasive. I wish her good luck, but I really don't see, I don't know, but sadly enough, I will never have her as part of the cabinet, by the way.
So you don't believe she has evidence to the over 1 million profit she says Kelvin VG has brought to the country?
My sister, you've been hearing these figures announced as if they are lotto numbers from every time she's asked a question about Kennedy VG. Not a shred of evidence. And even when journalists would ask further questions about it, she virtually berates them that you don't know what you're talking about. You see today, it's come back to bite there. I mean, if you're paying $1.5 million every month on a contract, at least you'll be able to justify by providing some actual figures and not relying on things that already the telcos deal with anyway. I mean, I think the very important question she was asked was, what was the rationale for this common platform? They said it's to cut telecom thieves. Then they asked her, is it the case that when you were just an executive, this was happening? She said no. That for me settles the matter. We are only grateful for some of these, should I call it, vetting processes. But she brought it upon herself, really. That's all I can say.
Mr. Senenu, the PDS deal has become very controversial. I mean, as we sit now, we really don't know the status, even though we know that we've been told that it's been abrogated and what have you. Mr. John Peter Mewu is supposed to reappear, and according to the Minority Caucus, he's supposed to he's supposed to clarify a number of issues relating to the PDS contract. Of particular interest is how much revenue was collected by PDS and the outstanding claims by PDS on government. The nominee is also required to provide further clarification on his role and proximity during the 27th December 2020 assault of the bailiff from the Ho High Court by alleged thugs associated to the former energy minister. But particularly on the PDS matter, you're satisfied with the reason given by the Minority Caucus?
Well, I think that the PDS matter is something that is worth definitely going back to and trying to demystify what exactly has transpired. I do know from some of our energy sector friends and colleagues that PDS actually began to get the systems to work and the money value chain from ECG down to the other players that would allow cash flow so that they could operationally take care of maintenance, etc. It actually improved under PDS, and so they did something right. So to the extent that PDS is saying they collected sums of money and these monies are due them, I definitely think it's a substantive issue. We are not clear in our minds whether this decision by government itself, on one hand, first having accepted a certain type of guarantee and later saying that is not what we wanted, ultimately all these changes have benefited this country. However, to the extent that there is a party saying that you owe us, and there was a substantive minister responsible and he has come back to be vetted for another position, definitely it's an issue to ask him to provide more clarity on.
Okay, let me bring in Dr. Pumpuni Asante, and also to add this one, which the Minority Caucus say Godfred Yeboah-Dame, who is Minister Designate for Attorney General, must come and clarify. And I heard a lot of people say the Attorney General Designate did well when he went for the vetting. It's actually surprising that his name is part of the people who are supposed to come. But this is their reason. They say he appears to have blatantly misled the committee on the true facts about the bill secured by lawyers of Gregory Afoko. He is required to provide the much-needed clarification on this all-important human rights issue. We will, in that regard, want to ascertain if he did not peddle an untruth under oath. The second one said the nominee failed to provide satisfactory answers on his role as member of the governing board of the Public Procurement Authority during the scandal involving the PPA Chief Executive Officer Jenny Mboatinje. He will be requested to come clean, particularly based on what is known to our side of the committee. His evasiveness and lack of candor on this matter in issue has left much to be desired.
Yeah, I think that the bottom line is that when you appear before a committee of parliament, your candor and your truthfulness is very important. So I think it's within the minority's right to expect that nominees who are appearing answer the questions. They answer the questions truthfully, because that also can go into character. It can go into competence, whether we should trust you with the resources and the powers of the state. So I think all of that is fair. Yes, I was a little surprised with seeing Godfred Dame's name there, because I think he showed his competence. But these matters, it's very important to the minority, clearly, on the Afoko matter. And I mean, I have had reason to also raise matters with the board and the role of the board in the PPA case. Up to today, we've not had some satisfactory explanations as to why the board basically, looked on for some of these things to happen. So I think, those things can be explained. But just to also make the point that, as I said, given the numbers and the issues with, currently on the floor, whether or not it will be that these nominees actually even appear for a second round or not will be a question of a vote in Parliament. So it will be interesting to see whether some of these nominees that have been deferred, because I am interested in some of the matters that have been raised and to get some clarity. PDS, I think, is huge, particularly as we also experience some doomsday here and there. We really need to know, what has happened post PDS and what assurances we can get to ensure we get, stable electricity. So I think some of the clarification on some of these matters, I am also interested. Whether or not the majority would allow for these processes to happen is another matter. We have said that, some of this is, in as much as we want objectivity from Parliament, we also want, we don't want business of government to grind to a halt. What's your expectation when, the plenary or the whole House begin to sit on this matter? So I think, on some of the matters that have been deferred, it is speaking to questions about, people clarifying, providing more details and so on. There are other matters that are a bit, I think, difficult to establish. It's almost like a trial. So even in the Hawa Kumsin's case, yes, her conduct and so on, which is part of it, she's admitted to, so she can't be questioned on. But, unless you have had a criminal resolution of it, it's very difficult to rely on that to make a case. So there are many matters there that some are being investigated. And the committee is really not seized with the opportunity, but they can make a judgment that based on the conduct, even the ones that you have explained, it might go to questions of character, it might go to questions of competence or trust, and that might be enough for them to say, no, we can't trust you with this, responsibility. So some of it is very tricky. I mean, after this process, I think it would be good to also reflect on how this has panned out. We want an active minority that is holding government to account, an active parliament that's holding government to account, but we also want to be able to do it within, some pragmatism. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit of a farce.
Mr. Sananu, let me take you back to Mr. Domelovo's issue. Tomorrow he'll be reporting to work confidently like you expect him to do. But we need a closure on this back and forth with the Auditor General. For you, the President, what role should the President play in this whole matter?
Well, to be honest, I think that the president, being a lawyer himself and looking at the constitution and the policy regime within which Mr. Domelovo finds himself, I think that a lot of us, well-intentioned Ghanaians, good governance experts, are clear in our minds that the office he occupies, like all other independent institutions, is such that we cannot, for the sake of keeping the checks and balances in our country, have a situation where the president sends the head of these independent institutions off on leave. From that perspective, I really would have looked forward to the president aligning with what we see as a spirit of the Constitution and say, perhaps earlier on, maybe Mr. Domelovo's attitude or something had upset someone, but let's allow him to finish this term and move on. It would make a lot of logic for many of us. It would instill a lot more confidence in our understanding of the position that this government has taken against corruption. And that's what we'll be looking forward to. Otherwise, I mean, together with Kojo, Franklin, and Co, we are in court. I mean, all of us in the space right now are part of this quest to get the Supreme Court to rule on this once and for all, so that we don't go into the future on this slippery slope where you can have another president being much more Machiavellian and doing things that don't extend and expand or promote the public good.
I'm grateful that you all joined me. Adam Sananu is co-chair of Citizen Movement Against Corruption. Dr. Kojo Pumpuni-Asante, Director of Advocacy and Policy Engagement, CDD Ghana, and Franklin Kujo, President, Imani Center for Policy and Education. Professor Kwabena Safo, who is Senior Research Fellow at Auditor, was supposed to join. He actually joined, but we had a terrible connection. We couldn't get him to join back again. I'm grateful that you all joined us, and thank you so much for watching. My name is Aisha Ibrahim. Enjoy the rest of our programs.